Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. Annu Subramanian, I think she tried to teach me this. Okay. She's written a couple novels. Now, even though they're fiction, they are based on true, I guess you could say true events. She's from India. She's done a lot of research over there on human trafficking. Her other books have to do with a lot of women's issues. Class system, religious upheaval, the whole shebang, I guess, of the third world kind of countries. But anyway, her novel's called Another Heaven that she's going to tell us about. So here's Annu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad to see all of you while we have gathered here to discuss my new novel, Another Heaven. This is like my new baby I love to brag about, talk about, show off to my friends and relatives. So thank you for coming. Another Heaven addresses two global issues, human trafficking and terrorism. People often ask me, why human trafficking and terrorism? Why have you addressed these issues? I have to be honest and tell them I didn't feel compelled to write this story at first, but when I was teaching a class called Eastern Literature at Academy of Holy Names in Albany a few years ago, my research invariably went to human trafficking and terrorism. My students would often do research on current events, and every day when they woke up, when I woke up, the first thing in the news was something about an explosion here or there or somewhere in the world. The novel focuses primarily on three issues: human rights abuse, racial, almost radical religious belief, and the psychological deception of terrorism. And all these three elements converge to feed on one another. I must explain what human trafficking is first. It's basically an organized criminal activity where human beings are treated as possessions. It's a horrific violation of human rights where thousands of children, girls, boys, women, and sometimes even men fall into the hands of traffickers, either in their own countries or somewhere abroad. They are controlled, terrorized, exploited, and forced into prostitution most of the time, or indentured labor in various parts of the world. The cruel thing is, once they are recruited and abducted and trained, it's very hard to keep track of them because they could be taken from, say, Albany, and they could be found somewhere 1,000 miles away. What my novel Another Heaven does is, it tries to show the consequence of trafficking in a different way, in a more serious way. The victims are mesmerized into believing that they have been chosen to perform their ultimate duty. And that duty is becoming missionaries of terrorism. They are trapped, they are helpless, and they are mesmerized into believing, they are brainwashed to such an extent that they think to engage in violent activities is what their purpose in life is all about. When I started to build the foundation for Another Heaven, I was concentrating on the plight of the victims of terrorism and the missionaries who have to make devastating decisions. But as my ideas began to develop, I realized that what I wanted to address more than the terrible consequences of terrorism was the plight of the victims of human trafficking. So terrorism led me to this novel, but human trafficking kept me hooked to the center of activity. I hoped, as I was writing one page after another, to speak to my readers, almost one-on-one, and tell them about the innocent individuals who are cruelly targeted for missionary duties. And I do mean duty in its fundamental sense, because the victims, through dangerous channels of human trafficking, are taken away to a horrifying world from which there is no return. Now, I must explain how radical religious beliefs feed on human trafficking. Extreme religious beliefs reach beyond faith-based compulsions. What begins as a sacred duty often develops into an uncontrollable urge. At any cost, the fanatic must carry out his missions and train his missionaries. And he will continue to hunt for individuals who will meet his requirements. And this is where the third element seeps in: psychological deception. A radical is trained to use psychology to entice individuals to become his missionaries, victims of human trafficking. He is not concerned about violation of human rights, where he has to train human beings to do what he wants them to do. He is training minds to execute his missions. Human rights abuse is an unavoidable problem, and it cannot interfere with his purpose. He has an agenda. He has to carry them out. And the same detachment goes for the lives as well. The loss of lives, lives going on, lives taken away, these things do not matter to him. For example, here is a scene where one of the victims of human trafficking is going through the last stages of brainwashing at the end of severe emotional and physical abuse. The master and a couple of his assistants are standing by the victim in the final stages of dehumanizing brainwashing process. A dim light fought for life in the dingy room. A creaky metal cot with smudged sheets and a damp pillow fought for breath in the corner. A frail, naked body of a young woman fought for dignity on the cot. He asked her, "Tell me, you have nobody." She answered, "I have nobody." He said, "Say it again." "I have nobody," she whispered. "Deserted love, deserted life." "Say it again. Come on, say it again." She said, "I have nobody," again and again and again. And the man suggested, gently taking her hand in his, "Say, nobody loves me." And she said, beginning to cry, "I have nobody, and nobody loves me." "Say, my society is my enemy." "Come on, say it. My society is my enemy." And she said, "My society is my enemy. It's wicked. You should kill your society, shouldn't you?" I will kill my society. "I have nothing to live for," she repeated. "I have nothing to live for, and I will kill my society." Her breathing became strenuous while the drug raced through her veins. "I promise, I promise to do anything you ask me to do." As she started to run in her dreams, gods, demons, men, and women began to chase her, pushing her towards the bottom of a bottomless ocean. There was no way out. Her father sold her, her love abandoned her, her society discarded her. Yes, she would destroy the world. Human trafficking is a many-layered racket. Most traffickers trap on vulnerable individuals, especially those who are struggling in poverty. Although one doesn't have to be poor to be recruited, a common bond among most victims is poverty, but it is not enough to sustain a victim's loyalty. It takes more than that, a lot more. For example, in the novel, during the process of selecting and recruiting a young homeless boy who is about 12 years old only, the recruiter goes to his master for approval and explains the boy's homeless condition and his very poor circumstances. In response, the master says, "I told you several times that disillusionment is the primary characteristic, a dominant trait necessary for a candidate. When a human hates mankind, order, and peace, you have spotted a good candidate. When that human's bitter experiences thirst for anarchy, then you have selected a perfect candidate. When that human's blood boils for more blood at the expense of his own bloodshed, then you have bred the ultimate candidate." So, a strong sense of disillusionment leads a victim to the ultimate point of abandonment. When this victim feels an absolute sense of disappointment and hopelessness, the master begins the art of manipulation. His acute sense of psychology works like tonic and acts as a bridge between the hunter and the hunted. Although Another Heaven discusses the evils of the acts of terrorism in general, it is not a typical terrorist story. It tries to expose the mind of a terrorist with psychological deception as the center of the narrative. Psychological deception is the most important resource of a terrorist because the act of brainwashing and the art of persuasion work well together to commit a crime. The biggest crime, the biggest swindle mankind is facing every day. It works on promises made that are not true, such as, "Just complete this mission and you will certainly go to heaven." And telling the missionary that it is the path to salvation. Two words work like magic in this game: heaven and salvation. Heaven and salvation. Come to think of it, the fanatic himself was once a victim of psychological deception. Earlier, while he was being recruited and trained, and the savage cycle continues. It will continue for generations until somebody puts a stop to it. Sadly, he reaches a point. It is the only world he knows where he can only think of his heaven, only think of his salvation. Nothing matters to him but those missions that he must get accomplished. A lot of us wonder, I'm sure, how terrorism continues to exist, taking roots within our communities. Our system, unfortunately, is not prepared to battle against a few voices trying to establish their unique agenda. Their agenda is set, nothing can change that. And it watches violence and even lets it thrive in the vulnerable hands of our world. Do we control the system? Or does the system control us? Nobody has an answer, even if there is one. And the answer, if it exists, is not clear to us. So not knowing where to turn, we, all of us, become victims of terrorism. Whether we die, watch others die, or simply worry about the future that could endanger the safety of our near and dear. Here is the scene where a psychoanalyst is questioning a terrorist in the prison. And this scene is not a typical scene, in the sense it doesn't solve any problem, but it happens on a day-to-day basis. Dr. Neil Shaker, a psychoanalyst, looked steadily at the elderly man tied to a chair in the middle of the room, while a dim ray of light from the corridor spread a dull hue inside the bleak, windowless cell. Shaker's eyes slid from the tight-fitting taggia on the prisoner's head to his wrinkled, scrawny, scorched face, where a pair of steely eyes menacingly glared in rage. "How many missions did you organize?" asked the analyst. "About 40, 50, 70, 90. I'm not sure," says the prisoner. "How come you don't remember?" he asks. And the prisoner says, "They don't matter to me." It doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter. They matter. What about all those lives? All those lives that got destroyed. "I feel no remorse," he says. "It is not my concern. Didn't I tell you already that my mission in life is to execute these missions? That's why Allah sent me to this earth. That is my only mission. But your conscience? I don't need one. I don't need a conscience. I go to heaven. Why would I need a conscience?" Later on, during another session, Dr. Shaker asked the terrorist, the same session continues, because he's trying desperately to find an answer. How and why this individual could be brainwashed to such an extent that he would think that taking another life does not matter. Does your heaven hold you in such a grip? Does it have such a hold on you? He says, yes, my heaven has a hold on me. I've been sent to this earth on a lease. And my heaven will take me back when the time is right. I've told you before, I'm telling you again. My heaven is a magnificent haven, and only a few chosen, distinguished human beings can enter. And you think you are the distinguished human being? And he says, I have no doubt at all that I will go to heaven. When he's almost on the verge of breaking down, because he can only talk about heaven so much, when he's almost on the verge of breaking down, the analyst says, there is no heaven for you. The number of sins you have committed, which God would endorse such violence? Which religion would condone such actions? And then he gets so mad, he says, the end of all means is the beginning. These 8 words, the end of all means is the beginning, appear in the beginning of the novel, in the middle of the novel, and at the end of the novel. The end of all means is the beginning. What the terrorist means by that is, he'll explain, my missions will never end. You may kill me today. I may be punished to death this minute, but my missions will never end because they will continue in somebody else's form. Because I have trained many, many men and women and children to continue where I have stopped, and my missions will never end. So the end of my means is not really my end. They are going to continue forever. While the topic of terrorism occupies almost every day of our lives, we must actively think of ways to counter it. We cannot just sit back and think that this is beyond our control. We, as a society, must do something about it. Another Heaven explores counterterrorism efforts, primarily through one of the key characters, Tina Matthew, a young doctoral student of psychology from Pennsylvania. She's working on her research to understand the motives behind terrorism, especially the psychology behind terrorism. While completing her thesis in India, she unwittingly finds herself in the center of a terrorist plot that involves human trafficking and a terminal mission. Some of these missions that the terrorist organizes, some of them are minor incidents. Yes, they create damage, but not all of them end up as terminal missions. Unfortunately, some do. She's working on her research to understand the motives, and what she does is come across a victim, and that incident changes her life forever. After encountering trauma faced by the victims, Tina's resolution to address terrorism turns into a passion. It is no longer just research. Now it is her calling. And she finds an equally passionate ally in Dr. Shaker, who has been her mentor. The horrific and tragic experiences of a character named Maya, the key character who is trafficked for a purpose. And Maya and her experiences change the course of the novel. By making an effort to address the ills of human trafficking and terrorism, Another Heaven aims to call for a bold campaign against a compulsion that is hurting humanity. The novel is not just about violence happening in one part of the world, and it's not an episode that is trying to expose a group of people. Realistically, when I think about how I planned to write this novel and what it has become here, when I think about it day in and day out, I have to say that it is a novel that speaks for violence everywhere in the world. Speaks for human rights abuse that is happening everywhere in the world. It's about individuals around the world who have unwittingly or deliberately become instruments of violence. So Another Heaven objectively, honestly speaks to a global audience. The novel takes its readers to various episodes of human trafficking It makes a journey through missions, missionaries who are subjected to lifelong servitude or terminal missions. A 25-year-old dies. Within a day, he is told, this is your mission, and go do it. He has to do it. Otherwise, they know where his family lives. They know under what circumstances his family is living. They know about his 19-year-old sister. He cannot escape. He has been fed. He has been taken care of. We did everything for you. Now you do what we ask you to do. It's as simple as that. While portraying a collapse of mankind that is triggered by fanatics and violence, Another Heaven tries to speak to its readers about a global conflict and appealing to the readers that it is a global concern. It's everybody's concern. In essence, I want Another Heaven to march out there and act as a crusade against a system that is systematically demolishing humanity. When I finished writing this novel, I was wondering what next? What can I do with this novel? And that's when it came to me that this has to be used to benefit victims of human trafficking. So the proceeds from this novel are benefiting victims of human trafficking. When the book was launched in May of last year, we had a panel discussion on human rights. And we helped an organization that is based in India called Apne Aap. Apne Aap rehabilitates marginalized women and children. They rescue them from red light areas, prostitutes. They teach them skills, and they show them a way out of misery. It's very hard. It's dangerous. The volunteers work under very dangerous circumstances because this is a money-making racket. So the only thing I can do from here is appeal to all of you to pay attention to any situation that might seem suspicious. Human trafficking, as I said earlier, is not something that happens far away from where we are living. It can happen in Schenectady, it can happen in Colonie, it can happen in Albany. Even 2 weeks ago, there was an incident at a massage parlor in Saratoga, I think. A couple of women were arrested, Scotia, and they were arrested because somebody was suspicious about what was going on, and they were basically running a prostitution ring. So it's very sad, but it is our concern. It's all of our concern to address these issues. I'm ready for your questions now.
Well, I would like to thank you for writing your book, number one, and making this issue a more broadly thing for education.
Thank you.
Educating the public, because I think it's much needed. And it's an issue that's been going on for many years. And I would like to let everybody know about an event that's happening right here in our own community on Valentine's Day at Siena College at 12:30. It's sponsored by the Women's Center there, and it's called 1 Billion Rising.
Okay.
And I don't know if some of you know about that, but it is, it's a movement that has been going on for several years, and it basically raises the issue of abuses to women worldwide. and 1 billion is the number of women who have been sexually or physically abused throughout the world. And Siena College is having this event at 12:30 in the quad, which is near the library at Siena College. And I would like to share that with everybody if you're interested. And there are all kinds of organizations, such as the one you mentioned, that are doing this sort of work throughout the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
In fact, one of the professors from Siena, Dr. Cherukuri, was one of the panelists when my book was launched. She participated in the discussion.
And the other question I had was about your research. I'm assuming that the incidents that you use in your novel are based on real-life research.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
I must say that I spent more time on my research than I did on writing the book itself. I did write a fiction to make it more interesting, I should say. Although they are based on real-life issues, incidents, episodes. Next question, please.
I'm interested with your Indian background and culture. Do you think that has provided you with some unique insights into this culture, if you will, of terrorism and human trafficking?
Yes, in fact, my mother lives in South India, and not very far from her town, an explosion occurred a few years ago. Started as unrest. There was a small disagreement between two religious communities, and then it slowly developed into a major incident, and a few people died. And when it happened very close to someone you love, it really makes an impact. And that is the day I really felt that I must do something about this. And I started writing my first chapter of Another Heaven. Yes?
I'm just beginning to learn about human trafficking, and basically because there was a group of religious leaders in the Albany area who came together and held a prayer service. And as a result, one of the sisters from that, who coordinated that, came to a meeting at the provincial house in Latham recently and gave us an hour, really kind of filled out more. You gave me anyway, some of the more basic kinds of things from your talk. One of the things that might be helpful, if anybody has any suspicion of trafficking going on, she gave us a phone number, and it's very simple to remember. It's 1-888-3737-888. So 3737-888. And this is, they've also, I don't know if you want me to keep going on, but they also, she also told of women who have gone into hotels, and they were at the pamphlet rack, and they picked up a pamphlet out of the rack, and they thought, what is this all about? Because it was obviously recruiting people. And so she brought it to the manager, and he said, I don't know where that came from. So he took all those pamphlets off, and he became more educated himself. Another person at this meeting said that Saratoga, because of the races, you think of the Super Bowl being a time when people are aware of this, but also in Saratoga we have the racing season in the summer, and that's another time to be aware. So some of the people from this group are going to go up and in the spring and advise the hotels, motels of what to be aware of.
When you mentioned Provincial House, I was thinking of Sister Doreen. Sister Doreen was one of the panelists at the discussion. So it's a small world, very small world. She does a lot of research.
Thank you very much for this, because it's been very helpful to me.
Thank you. Yes.
Just make a comment. I'm shocked I mean, the book set in India, and my mind was that, okay, this is India, and I know that it happens in other places. What you're saying, and you're saying about in watching Saratoga, and there's a telephone number that you can call, and your comment that they're having something happening over at Siena. I'm sitting here, I'm shocked. I'm just shocked. I thought I was going to hear about the book, and I was even like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to read this. It's going to be really sad. It's going to be hard. Well, okay, I'm going to go. Well, now I know why I was questioning whether I want to go. Like, oh my God, this is happening right in my hometown. I hate this. I hate this. I hate knowing that. I mean, I hate it's happening, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go hide in my house and not look at anything.
I understand what you mean. There are two parts to this. One is just coming to terms with something as horrifying as this happening, not very far from where we live. And the second part is, what do we do about it? We have to do something about it because we have to protect our neighbors, our children, our children's children, sometimes nieces, nephews, a friend, a neighbor's kid. Everybody matters, and it is our concern. We can no longer think that, oh, what can we do? We can do something about it. Being more aware of what's going on. Talk about it. Have a group discussion. Have a book club. Talk about this. It will help. It will matter.
I think that, I'm not quite finished with your book, but I think one of the real readable parts about your book is that it doesn't cross the border of becoming salacious. I think that young people can read the book. I think that anybody can, and without being afraid of expose. I don't know the word really, but it doesn't gross you out.
Oh, okay. That's a good thing to know.
Yeah, it's, you know what I mean? So it's very, very readable, and I think any age. And I think it's important for young women to read a book like this.
Yes, thank you.
On the other hand, and my best friend here is reading it and saying, I'm a school social worker who retired for the 5th time last week. And one of the things that I'm just amazed about is the level of anxiety in our young people. And, you know, just from going to public school and feeling like all they hear is the kind of predators that are out there looking to victimize them. And I think if young people do read a book like that, they need to somehow be empowered to know that there are people who are doing something. Because I think, for me, the very simple definition of anxiety is a fear that you can't put your finger on. You know, if they're fearful of the dark or they're fearful of the man next door, you can kind of make a plan of how to deal with that. But I think something like this, their vulnerability just escalates because anybody could be a victim.
Anybody. And someone asked me, my child is 13. My daughter is 13. Can she read this? And I said, well, you have to be the judge. Tell her about the topic. I would suggest, I know some of the 9th graders are reading this. It's not for middle school children. But I know one of my friend's daughter is waiting to read this, and I told her, the minute you finish 8th grade, that summer, the first day of your summer break, you can read this. Because you're going to enter high school, and you are ready for it. And as you said, when young girls and boys read this, they can be assured that everybody knows about this problem. I don't have to be worried. I don't have to be scared. There is help out there because I have tried to show to the best of my ability that we can do something about it.
I think that the vulnerability for the kids would be that the kids who are victims of this, for the most part, are kids who are feeling a disconnect with their community, a lack of safety in their community, and things like that. I know even in schools, if kids know that There's a safety, usually a retired policeman at the front door. There are cameras in it for every hallway. Some things that will alleviate somewhat their anxiety about being in school, that there are people in charge and they're taking care to make sure you're safe. And I think even with ninth graders, there's a difference between the chronological age and the mental age, and some of those ninth graders are really like 11. But to somehow say you are probably not a victim, because there are so many things around here, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be empathic to what's going on for kids in other parts of the world, other parts of our community. As you say, Schenectady has pockets where kids are vulnerable.
Yes, everybody is. You made a very good point. Most often, a victim remains a victim because the person who's taking advantage of the victim would try to convince that person that, you have come this far, there is no going back. What will you do? There is no life for you. Nobody is going to trust you. Nobody is going to respect you. The society is not going to accept you. What are you going to do? You might as well go forward. There is no going back. That is horrible, but it happens. Yes.
What's your particular training and experience? Your training to delve into these psychological areas.
I'm a teacher. I direct a writing center at Brown School currently, and I was teaching at Academy of Holy Names, a private school, girls' school in Albany. And I do a lot of research in order to teach a class, because I was teaching a course called Eastern Literature, and almost on a daily basis, I was reading a lot of material, speaking to a lot of professionals, having interviews with professors and social workers. And that's how I developed a lot of research material and the knowledge that I needed to start something like this.
Do you have particular psychological training of any?
I don't have training in psychology, but I do read a lot about psychology.
Okay. I find the talk of subjugating young minds or minds that are distressed, I see a parallel eventually leading to the death of people for religious or other reasons. But I see a terrible parallel between this and the Nazi threat that was present in World War II. I mean, that was a religious fever that led to the extermination of many people. And although I certainly have been part of this in another sense, we are trained as young people in America to value the profit motive. And we have found through the conservation movement that many things that result in profit lead to people's deaths because of pollution and greed and things like that. And it's just, there's so many parallels, it seems to me.
In fact, Dr. Rudy Neidegger from Schenectady, he moderated the panel discussion when my book was launched. And he said, this has been going on for generations, he said. He did quote the Nazis, and he talked about the racial prejudice that has existed in this country. And he said there is always someone who has the power, who tries to manipulate somebody else. The reason may not be clear, but it happens everywhere, and you can find a lot of parallel.
Solzhenitsyn in the book a lot. I don't know a lot about him. Maybe you can speak to that a bit?
Sure. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was born in 1918, and at that time he served in the war. One time he wrote a letter to his friend, a personal letter to his friend criticizing Stalin, and that was the end of it. He was taken to prison, a Soviet prison camp, for 8 years. Because how dare you criticize? In those 8 years, he thought about human rights abuse, because he faced it almost on a daily basis. and he wrote a lot. He was finally awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, but he was not allowed to leave his country to accept the prize. But he wrote as an acceptance speech anyway, and it was published as an essay. In that speech moved me, made me who I am today. In that speech, he draws the role of a writer. He points out 5 principles that a writer should follow, and those are the principles that make a writer. One is to be a critique of society. The next is to be a critique of government. The third is to dig any dirt that your society or your country has and expose it to the rest of the world. That is a duty, he says. The fourth is to be a spokesperson for your own countrymen and consequently to everybody in the world. The last one is my most favorite. He says, world literature is like one great heart. It pumps blood, keeps all of us together, unified. And when someone in New York reads about a character that an author in Bangladesh is writing about, we all are encouraged to feel how others feel. We can feel sympathy, we can feel compassion, we can feel a sense of oneness. We are all children of one world. That is Solzhenitsyn, and that's the kind of writer I want to be.
Are you ever threatened?
Once or twice.
It would seem as if people would know
Yes.
what you're having to say.
Yes. In fact, there were a couple of very close friends and family members who did not want me to publish this book. But I am Solzhenitsyn's child. I had to publish it. And I want as many people as possible to read this. So please tell your friends about Another Heaven and why it is important for us to meet like this, talk about human trafficking, talk about terrorism, and why we should do something about this.
Are you available to visit book clubs?
Yes.
Yeah?
I live in Niskayuna.
My daughter is actually a school counselor in Beverly Hills, and she just wrote to me and said that everyone in her school, it's a high school just for girls, and I'm wondering, she said it's an author from Schenectady. Do you know of other schools around that are having their kids read? Because I'm curious to know now if
Yes,
it's a book.
I think some schools have started even adding this to the summer reading list. And I think one teacher is even teaching it in a class. I'm not sure about the school, but I heard that this is being taught now. Because as my friend here said, it is a book that anybody can read from age 14 to 94. Yes.
Would you say that education worldwide, helping communities worldwide be educated helps to bring these vulnerable people, and that includes our own country, up out of poverty so that they are less vulnerable?
I hope so. Your question is, are we doing enough? Is that your question? I think we are, but there is always room for improvement. We should do more. We should do more. Education is the key to success. Because if one has education, I wouldn't say that human trafficking would not occur because it's an easy way to make money. Poverty is one. When a person is poor, I think the main concern is getting some food inside, and other concerns take, a back seat. but it is definitely something to consider. Thank you. Thank you.